Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we slip through lacquered gates before sunrise and shuffle quietly into one of the most guarded places on Earth. Not a treasure vault, not an emperor's bedroom, but something perhaps even more dangerous in the Ming Dynasty. A library. You, sleepy traveler that you are, have somehow landed a job as a humble librarian inside the vast imperial machinery of China's Forbidden City, where one crooked bow, one smudge of ink, or one badly timed sneeze near a priceless manuscript could absolutely ruin your whole week. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a single afternoon here without crying for air conditioning and ergonomic chairs, because this is bureaucracy with dragon carvings. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive while the stars are still fading, when Beijing, then called by many simply the Great Ming capital, breathes frost into the pale dawn. The massive walls of the Forbidden City rise ahead like a sleeping mountain painted red and gold, their surfaces catching the earliest gray-blue light. Your cloth shoes scuff against stone still cold from the night, and your breath curls in front of you like incense that forgot where the altar was. This is the 15th century, during the Ming Dynasty, an age of porcelain brilliance, naval ambition, and administrative paperwork so immense it might make your modern inbox seem like a friendly suggestion. The emperor rules from behind vermilion walls, and within these walls, every movement has choreography. You do not simply walk in. You pass through checkpoints, offer identification slips, bow correctly, and avoid eye contact with anyone important enough to ruin your family line. Your role is not glamorous. You are not a minister, not a general, not even the guy who dramatically announces visitors. You are a low-ranking keeper of texts, one among many obscure custodians of paper memory. Forgotten by history, mostly, but your hands, if steady enough, may touch what princes cannot casually spill soup on. At the Meridian Gate, guards inspect arrivals with the emotional warmth of locked cabinets. Their armor glints faintly. Somewhere in the distance, a bronze bell tolls, deep and resonant, as if the morning itself has been officially approved. You shuffle in with clerks, attendants, copyists, and eunuchs, all flowing inward like a human river trained never to splash. The smell reaches you first. Pine smoke, damp silk, old paper, and the mineral scent of ground ink. It is oddly comforting, like the world's strictest bookstore. The Imperial Library complex, though less famous than Grand Throne halls, is no small afterthought. Under the Yongle Emperor, who ruled from 1402 to 1424 and famously relocated the capital to Beijing, knowledge itself became a symbol of power. This was a ruler who commissioned the Yongle Encyclopedia, or Yongle, one of the largest literary projects in human history. Imagine Wikipedia, but handwritten by exhausted scholars with brushes and no delete key. As you enter the archive halls, you notice architecture designed not merely for beauty, but for preservation. Thick beams, wide eaves, elevated floors to combat moisture. Historians still debate the exact internal daily logistics of some Ming archival spaces, but surviving records suggest obsessive attention to order. Fire was a constant terror. Water damage, mold, insects. These were villains as feared as invading armies. You bow to your supervisor, a narrow-faced senior librarian whose expression suggests he was born disappointed. He checks your sleeves for cleanliness. Dust here is not just dirt. Dust is decay. Dust is negligence. Dust is how dynasties accidentally forget things. He says little because people in highly structured bureaucracies often weaponize silence better than speeches. You are led through corridors lined with shelves, scroll cases, stitched volumes, bamboo paper bundles, and lacquered cabinets. Some texts concern Confucian classics. Others preserve tax law, astronomy, medicine, agricultural techniques, poetry, military strategy, and court records. Somewhere, perhaps only a few rooms away, are works so politically sensitive they require layers of permission that make modern password resets seem merciful. And then comes your first lesson: ritual. Before handling important texts, your hands must be clean, your sleeves tied back, your posture controlled. You do not lick fingers to turn pages unless you wish to become a cautionary tale. You use tools, slender bamboo slips, weights, cloth supports. The fragility of paper, especially precious editions, demands reverence. In Europe around this period, chained libraries were securing books from thieves. Here in Ming China, imperial authority itself was often enough chain. You learn quickly that a book is never just a book. It may contain statecraft, ancestral legitimacy, astronomical omens, or dangerous philosophy. One text can preserve a dynasty's wisdom or undermine it. There is strangely humor too. A fellow junior clerk whispers that if you drop a scroll from the upper shelf, try to look scholarly while panicking. Another quietly warns you never to confuse imperial genealogies with grain reports unless you'd like to invent very productive princes. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is plain millet porridge consumed quickly and without ceremony. No artisan lattes, no avocado toast, just survival in bowl form. As the sun rises higher, light filters through latticed windows, illuminating dancing dust motes like tiny spirits of dead scholars still proofreading. You are assigned your first practical duty, transporting wrapped manuscripts from one chamber to another. This sounds easy. It is not. You must carry them balanced, dry, untouched by sweat, and safe from collision. The corridors twist through courtyards where frost melts into slick stone. Senior officials glide past in embroidered robes. Eunuchs move efficiently, often wielding more influence than outsiders realize. In the Ming court, eunuchs could become astonishingly powerful, sometimes controlling access, information, even military channels. It's one of history's reminders that titles alone rarely explain real power. Your arms ache, your shoulders tense. You become deeply aware that human dignity can, in fact, be reduced to carrying expensive paperwork very carefully. By midday, you've survived only because disaster has not yet noticed you. But beneath the routine, something stirs. These halls are more than storage. They are an empire attempting to outlive mortality through organization. Every copied text, every catalog volume, every repaired page is a wager against oblivion. And you, astonishingly, are now part of that wager. So you keep walking softly between red columns and shadowed shelves, deeper into a place where memory is guarded like treasure, where silence is discipline, and where your ordinary footsteps begin their strange journey into the vast breathing archive of the Ming world. Section 2. By your second morning, your body has already begun adapting to the strange choreography of imperial paper life. Though adapting may be generous when your knees still protest every bow like disgruntled bureaucrats filing complaints. Dawn arrives pale and cold again, brushing silver over tiled roofs, and you now know the route well enough to avoid looking completely lost, which, in the Forbidden City, is approximately the same as becoming invisible. A useful skill, because invisibility here is job security. The corridors no longer seem quite so overwhelming, though they remain vast enough to make modern office parks feel like broom closets. You pass under painted beams where dragons coil among clouds, symbols of imperial majesty soaring overhead, while you, humble keeper of dust, try not to trip over your own sleeves. The air smells faintly of pine ash, drying paper, and the sharp mineral tang of soot ink, a scent that settles into your hair and clothes so thoroughly you begin to suspect you may one day cough up calligraphy. Today, your supervisor, whose face still resembles a disappointed bookmark, assigns you to what he clearly considers foundational labor: ink preparation and shelf maintenance. This is not glamorous work, no secret philosophies, no hidden scrolls, no whispered state secrets. You are making ink. In Ming China, quality ink was often made from soot, commonly pine soot or oil soot, mixed with animal glue and sometimes scented materials, then molded into sticks. To use it, you grind the ink stick slowly against an inkstone with water until liquid blackness forms. It is meditative, precise, and surprisingly exhausting for something that appears from a distance, like politely rubbing a rock. Too much water, and the ink weakens. Too little, and it thickens like tar. Uneven grinding creates inconsistency, and inconsistency in official documents is the bureaucratic equivalent of showing up to a royal banquet wearing clown shoes. So you kneel, you grind some more. Hours seem to dissolve into circular motion. Stone whispers against stick in soft, rasping loops, like an ancient ASMR channel nobody monetized. Senior scribes inspect viscosity with unnerving seriousness. One raises an eyebrow so subtly it somehow communicates an entire lecture on standards. You adjust. Historians widely recognize calligraphy not merely as handwriting in imperial China, but as a cultivated moral discipline. Brushwork reflected character. A steady hand suggested a steady mind. In some circles, sloppy strokes could imply inner disorder. Imagine your grocery list being treated as psychological warfare. Once enough ink is prepared, you move to shelf duty. This means cleaning and preserving texts without damaging them, a task requiring absurd delicacy. You are issued feather dusters, soft cloths, and stern warnings. Dust accumulates relentlessly, and in archive spaces, it is not harmless. Dust traps moisture, invites pests, and accelerates decay. Paper, especially handmade Schwann paper or delicate archival material, is vulnerable to climate in ways your smartphone thankfully is not. You begin in a chamber storing Confucian classics, texts foundational to civil service, education, and governance. The 4 books, the 5 classics, and endless commentaries sit arranged with such care that shifting one volume incorrectly might spark administrative despair. You learn to remove each carefully, clean shelf edges, inspect stitching, and replace every item exactly. Exactly. Not close enough. Not I'm pretty sure. Exactly. This is perhaps your first true lesson in imperial librarianship. Order is ideology. Confucian governance emphasized hierarchy, ritual, and disciplined scholarship. Libraries were not neutral. They preserved approved memory. What sat on these shelves shaped examinations, official thinking, and elite identity across generations. Knowledge was curated power. As morning drifts onward, a senior archivist explains catalog markings. Titles are labeled according to subject, rank, and authorized version. Different editions may exist, but not all are equally acceptable. Some commentaries are favored, others are tolerated. A few are quietly unwelcome. You realize, with a chill no robe quite solves, that libraries can preserve truth, but also shape it. Still, there are smaller curiosities too. You find agricultural manuals detailing rice cultivation, flood control, mulberry planting, and silk production. There are medicinal texts describing herbal remedies, pulse diagnostics, and treatments involving ingredients that sound equal parts genius and kitchen accident. One strange note references crocodile-derived substances in older medicinal lore, which is perhaps a nice moment to remember that weird health trends did not begin on the internet. At midday, your fingers are blackened. Ink creeps into nail beds and skin creases until your hands look like you've been gently wrestling crows. Lunch is steamed buns and tea, consumed near an inner courtyard where winter sunlight briefly softens the severe geometry of palace life. Here, among lower staff, conversation loosens. A copyist jokes that if scholars spent half as much energy bathing as annotating, history would smell better. Another mutters that some ministers quote sages mainly to sound profound before lunch. You wisely laugh, but not too loudly. There is gossip, naturally. The imperial household runs on it almost as much as on grain taxes. A eunuch mentions supply disputes. Someone whispers of examination fraud in distant provinces. Someone else claims a scholar was reprimanded for miscopying a date, though details vary. Historians still debate many specific court anecdotes because official records often preferred polished narratives over embarrassing realities. Bureaucracies, ancient or modern, do love selective memory. Back at work, your afternoon introduces humidity monitoring, primitive but serious. Ventilation matters. Moisture is enemy and ally depending on season. Windows are adjusted. Cabinets checked. In some archival traditions, insect deterrents included herbal compounds. Preservation was practical science long before climate-controlled vaults. As golden light stretches across shelves, you begin to notice sounds beyond silence. The brush-tip scratch of scribes, the muffled footfall of cloth shoes, distant bells, paper rustling like dry leaves, wooden drawers sliding. It is not quiet. It is orchestral restraint. And somewhere between dusting a shelf of historical annals and rewrapping stitched volumes, you feel it, that subtle shift. You are no longer merely intimidated. You are beginning to understand. This place is alive, not through noise, but through continuity. Thousands of minds, generations apart, breathing through brushstrokes. Farmers, philosophers, emperors, astronomers, all pressed into fiber and thread. You finish your day exhausted, your spine politely ruined, but your senses sharpened. Ink stains your cuffs. Dust clings to your hem. Your shoulders ache as though burdened by civilization itself, which in fairness is not entirely inaccurate. And as evening lanterns glow amber in carved halls, you leave the stacks knowing tomorrow may bring grander secrets. But for now, survival depends on mastering soot, silence, and the sacred art of putting things back exactly where they belong. Section 3. By the third day, your hands have developed the cautious reflexes of someone who now understands that paper can be more dangerous than swords, at least to your employment prospects. You no longer flinch at every shouted instruction from passing officials. Though your spine still straightens so quickly during inspections, it could probably qualify as military architecture. The Ming court continues its grand performance around you. Bronze vessels gleam in courtyards, banners stir in the brittle northern breeze, and somewhere far beyond your station, emperors and ministers decide the fate of millions. But here in your quieter kingdom of shelves and stitched volumes, another kind of empire waits. Today, you are summoned deeper into the archive. Not metaphorically, actually deeper. Your supervisor appears at dawn with his usual expression, half suspicion, half administrative fatigue, and motions for you to follow. No explanation, just a glance sharp enough to cut parchment. So you do what any sensible underling in a dragon-governed bureaucracy does. You obey immediately and try not to look like a man walking toward either promotion or annihilation. You pass familiar corridors, then less familiar ones, moving beyond common scholarly collections into increasingly restricted chambers. Doors grow thicker, locks more elaborate, guards more alert. Even the air changes, cooler, drier, touched with cedar, lacquer, and something almost ceremonial. This, you begin to realize, is not ordinary storage. This is where the Dynasty keeps one of its intellectual crown jewels, the Yongle Encyclopedia. Commissioned by the Yongle Emperor in the early 15th century, this monumental encyclopedia was among the largest knowledge compilations in world history. Over 2,000 scholars worked to compile it, drawing from thousands of texts across philosophy, literature, religion, science, history, and more. Rather than merely summarizing works, it often preserved entire texts within its volumes. Think less reference book and more civilization attempting to photocopy itself by hand. The scale was absurd. Originally, it contained over 22,000 manuscript chapters in more than 11,000 volumes. Not printed, because woodblock printing something this massive would have been staggeringly impractical. It existed largely as handwritten manuscript sets, monumental in both scholarship and wrist endurance. As you step inside, you are hit first by size. Cabinets tower, shelves stretch, bundles and cases seem endless. Even breathing feels louder here, as if oxygen itself requires authorization. Your task is modest. Assist in inspection and relocation of selected volumes for maintenance review. You are not here to read freely, naturally. You are here to support men whose sleeves are cleaner and ranks significantly safer. Still, proximity alone is intoxicating. You catch glimpses, sections on astronomy, rare ritual practices, poetry anthologies, governmental systems, local customs, medicinal formulas. One senior scholar explains, with the restrained pride of a man trying not to emotionally hug a bookshelf, that this collection preserves countless earlier works, some already rare even in Ming times. And here comes one of history's quieter heartbreaks. Much of the Yongle Encyclopedia would later be lost, scattered, burned, stolen, or destroyed across centuries of upheaval. Historians still debate exactly how major portions vanished, especially regarding the fate of certain copies and losses during later dynastic crises. Standing here in its relative fullness, you occupy a rare moment before catastrophe becomes history. Naturally, because fate enjoys irony, your immediate concern is not philosophical wonder. It is carrying things without dropping them. Each volume is enormous, wrapped carefully, often bulky, weighty with layered paper and protective covers. You are instructed to support from beneath, never squeeze edges, never stack improperly, and absolutely never, under any circumstances, set one down carelessly. A senior archivist explains environmental threats with chilling detail. Fire remains supreme nightmare. The Forbidden City's many wooden structures are magnificent, but vulnerable. Lightning, candle accidents, negligence, each could erase centuries. Water, insects, and careless hands rank closely behind. Oddly enough, this makes your modern fear of spilling coffee on a keyboard feel refreshingly manageable. As work continues, you witness verification protocols. Catalog references are cross-checked, condition notes updated, missing folios investigated. Damage, even slight, prompts bureaucratic concern, impressive enough to make airport security seem spontaneous. Yet among this rigor, strange treasures emerge. One section references unusual regional recipes. Another preserves ancient divination systems. Another contains agricultural innovations, including irrigation techniques that help sustain enormous populations. And tucked amid respected scholarship are occasional oddities, fragments of folklore, esoteric remedies, or obscure local records whose inclusion suggests the compilers cast a breathtakingly wide net. The encyclopedia was not merely elite philosophy, it was a sprawling net for human thought. A scholar beside you mutters, perhaps forgetting your lower status for a moment, that preserving everything can itself become dangerous. Too much knowledge, poorly governed, invites contradiction. You are not entirely sure whether he means politically or existentially, which in imperial China may honestly be the same thing. During a brief pause, you observe the calligraphic consistency, thousands of pages, copied with astonishing discipline. While different scribes contributed, formatting standards maintained coherence. This was information architecture before databases, metadata by brushstroke. And yet, for all this grandeur, the room is profoundly human. Someone coughs. Someone stretches cramped fingers. Someone quietly complains about dust in a way that could have been spoken in any century. Even monumental scholarship, it turns out, still involves back pain. You hear mention of an extraordinary historical truth. The original manuscript was so vast that even making a duplicate copy later became a colossal undertaking. During the Jiajing Emperor's reign, fearing disaster, another copy was commissioned. A wise move, considering how vulnerable knowledge always is. As afternoon light fades through lattice screens, golden and thin, you help return a volume to its place. Your arms tremble slightly, not just from weight, but from awareness. You are touching one thread in a tapestry meant to hold the world. Not perfectly, not forever, but earnestly. And perhaps that is what moves you most. Empires conquer land, armies win borders. But here, quietly, scholars and librarians wage war against forgetting. By the time you leave the chamber, cedar scent clinging to your robes, your mind feels wider somehow. You entered fearing mistakes. You leave understanding scale, not merely of books, but of ambition. The Ming did not simply want to rule. They wanted to gather, order, and contain civilization itself between covers. And you, dusty little paper guardian, have now brushed against one of history's boldest attempts. Section 4. By now, your mornings have acquired a dangerous rhythm. Wake before dawn. Dress in layers that somehow manage to be both heavy and inadequate. Bow to more people than your spine considers ethical. And step once more into the red-walled labyrinth where books are guarded with greater consistency than emotional vulnerability. You have survived ink duty, shelf discipline, and the dizzying majesty of the Yongle Encyclopedia without accidentally toppling civilization, which in Ming Librarian terms counts as a promising start. So naturally, the universe rewards you not with rest, but with lunch. Or rather, something adjacent to lunch. Midday in the Imperial Library is less a cheerful break and more a carefully rationed pause in humanity's long administrative sigh. Yet for someone in your position, this narrow window between duties becomes unexpectedly revealing, because behind every polished court ritual, every lacquered shelf, and every reverent brushstroke, there are still people, hungry, tired, gossiping people. The meal bell does not ring with enthusiasm. It sounds more like history clearing its throat. You follow streams of scribes, junior archivists, attendants, and palace functionaries into a quieter side courtyard near storage annexes. Here, beneath bare branch trees and along stone paths still holding morning chill, workers gather with bowls, wrapped buns, teacups, and expressions suggesting they've all personally been offended by paperwork. Your meal today is steamed wheat buns, salted vegetables, and weak tea. No imperial banquet, no roasted duck, no mysterious jewel-like desserts, just enough calories to continue preserving dynastic memory without fainting dramatically onto state records. Still, hunger has a charming ability to improve perspective. You sit on a low wooden bench near stacked supply crates and try not to look too fascinated by everyone else, which is difficult because this may be the closest thing the imperial bureaucracy has to social media. Conversation begins cautiously. A copyist beside you, whose fingers are permanently ink-shadowed, grumbles about a damaged brush shipment from Suzhou. Another complains that grain prices outside the palace are rising faster than his salary, which, judging by his tone, may currently be measured in disappointment. Someone jokes that if Confucius had ever worked archive inventory, he'd have added several chapters on lower back pain. You laugh softly, appropriately. One never knows who might report excessive merriment. And then come the eunuchs. Now, in the Ming Dynasty, eunuchs were far more than background palace staff. Castrated men serving within imperial households often held access unavailable to conventional officials, particularly because they could move within inner court spaces barred to many others. Over time, some eunuchs accumulated enormous political influence. Certain figures effectively shaped intelligence networks, administrative decisions, and imperial communication. Historians still debate the full extent of specific individuals' influence, but there is little doubt that palace power often flowed through channels more complicated than official charts suggested. So when a pair of eunuchs pause nearby, balancing tea and conversation with unnerving poise, everyone listens without appearing to. One mentions a scholar recently reprimanded for including politically inconvenient phrasing in a copied historical commentary. Another alludes to a ministerial dispute over ceremonial expenditures. The details are vague, naturally, because palace gossip thrives on ambiguity the way mold loves damp paper. But here, between bites of bland cabbage, you learn something crucial. The library is not isolated from politics. It is soaked in it. Texts are copied, preserved, or emphasized not only because they are wise, but because they matter to governance. Which editions circulate, which commentaries are preferred, which precedents are cited, all shape policy and ideology. A library can be a battlefield wearing quieter shoes. As lunch continues, you overhear one older scribe discussing the civil service examinations, those grueling Confucian-based tests that offered ambitious men one of the few paths upward. These exams were notorious for intensity. Candidates sometimes spent days in cramped cells writing essays under extreme pressure. Entire family fortunes could hinge on literary precision. Compared to this, modern standardized testing suddenly seems slightly less cruel, though still annoying. Someone jokes that failing the exams repeatedly can turn a man into either a philosopher or an alcoholic. Probably both. You also hear whispers of strange library habits. Certain scholars, apparently, bring personal scent sachets to counter the smell of old paper and glue. One aristocratic visitor reportedly refused to touch manuscripts unless attendants warmed his hands first. Whether true or exaggerated, nobody can say. Bureaucracies, ancient and modern, are fertile ground for absurd personalities. Then comes one of the oddest little facts you encounter. Bookworms, insects, not scholars, were such a genuine concern that preservation practices sometimes involved herbal repellents, strategic airflow, and careful storage design. Imagine defending philosophy from tiny beetles with all the urgency of national defense. After eating, workers stretch, sip tea, or briefly doze in patches of winter sun. This, you discover, may be the most luxurious activity available to lower staff, sitting still. You share a quiet moment with another junior librarian who tells you his uncle once handled provincial land records. Numbers, he sighs, can be as dangerous as swords when taxes are involved. Fair point. Then, inevitably, conversation drifts toward rumors about hidden texts. Supposedly, certain controversial writings, heterodox philosophies, politically sensitive histories, maybe even banned interpretations, exist somewhere deeper in restricted archives. Perhaps concealed, perhaps merely cataloged discreetly. Historians continue debating the scope and mechanisms of censorship in different Ming periods, but imperial China certainly saw recurring efforts to regulate intellectual life. Whether the whispers are true hardly matters. The idea alone electrifies you, because once you know forbidden shelves might exist, every corridor feels different. Lunch ends too soon, bowls empty, tea cools, bodies rise, the machinery restarts. You return indoors carrying not just a full stomach by modest standards, but a fuller understanding. Empires do not run solely on decrees from gilded halls. They run on clerks, gossip, anxieties, ambitions, and noodles of questionable texture. And as you step back between towering shelves, hearing once again the hush of paper and brush, you realize something almost comforting. Even in one of history's grandest courts, surrounded by imperial power and literary monuments, people are still people, trading rumors, nursing sore feet, worrying about supervisors, and trying very hard not to spill tea on anything historically significant. Section 5. By the fifth section of your increasingly ink-stained existence, you've begun to understand one of the Ming Dynasty's least glamorous truths. Empires are not maintained solely by emperors, armies, or marble proclamations. No, they are also upheld by exhausted people sitting for unreasonable lengths of time, copying things, endlessly, painstakingly, with risks that surely deserved hazard pay. You have now been selected, whether because of competence, availability, or the bureaucratic equivalent of, you seem unlikely to ruin this, to begin formal training in manuscript copying. This is a step upward, technically. You are no longer merely dusting civilization, you are helping reproduce it. Naturally, this is terrifying. The copying chamber sits quieter than most sections of the archive, and somehow even the silence feels supervised. Rows of desks stand beneath filtered daylight, each equipped with brushes, inkstones, weighted paper supports, and exemplars positioned with almost sacred precision. Here, words are not casually written. They are replicated with the seriousness of legal surgery. A senior calligrapher greets your group of trainees with the emotional tone of a tax audit. He explains that copying official texts is not creative work. You are not here to express yourself. You are not innovating. This is not your memoir era. You are becoming, in essence, a human printing press with better posture. Movable type did exist in parts of East Asia before and during the Ming period, and woodblock printing was widespread, but for certain archival, scholarly, or imperial purposes, hand copying remained crucial, especially for preserving rare texts, producing specialized editions, or ensuring control. Handwritten manuscripts also carried prestige and flexibility. Your first lesson is brush discipline. Grip too tightly and your lines stiffen. Too loosely and characters wobble like tired ducks. Too much ink and the page blots. Too little and strokes fade. Your instructor demonstrates with maddening elegance, his brush gliding in fluid authority. Every line breathes, every hook lands perfectly. It is less writing than choreography. You, by comparison, resemble someone attempting surgery during an earthquake. Still, you begin. Character by character, stroke by stroke. You copy passages from Confucian instructionals first, because apparently your moral cultivation and handwriting are both under suspicion. The text discusses virtue, hierarchy, propriety. Meanwhile, your personal virtue is currently measured by not smearing wet ink with your sleeve. Hours pass. Your hand cramps, your shoulders tighten, your neck develops opinions. But gradually, something shifts. The brush begins to obey. Not perfectly, of course. You still produce occasional strokes that suggest philosophical instability. Yet repetition creates rhythm. You breathe differently. You learn that calligraphy in this world is not just literacy. It is discipline embodied. Scholars often viewed brushwork as evidence of cultivation. Historians still debate how much handwriting truly reflected moral character versus educational polish. But socially, the connection mattered. Then comes correction. Oh, correction. Mistakes are not simply circled with cheerful red pen. A supervisor reviews your page and points silently at a flawed character. Not ruined, not catastrophic, just insufficient. And somehow that silence is worse than shouting. You redo the entire page. This, perhaps, is when you truly appreciate modern backspace keys as one of civilization's finest inventions. As days of training continue, you learn specialized practices, maintaining margin consistency, preserving source formatting, identifying damaged exemplars, and using verbal context to resolve ambiguous faded characters. A missing stroke can alter meaning significantly. Bureaucratic records, legal texts, ritual manuals, precision matters. One famous historical reality of Chinese textual culture is the challenge of transmission accuracy across centuries. Scribal error, commentary layering, political revision, and regional variation all complicated preservation. You are now one tiny soldier in that war against textual entropy, and occasionally, hilariously, against human boredom. To stay focused, some copyists develop rituals. One flexes fingers every 100 characters, another murmurs passages under his breath. A particularly eccentric older scribe insists sesame sweets improve punctuation judgment. Science may remain unconvinced. You begin encountering more varied materials too. Poetry collections demand elegance. Administrative law demands exactness. Medical texts become deeply strange. One herbal manuscript includes ingredients that make you wonder whether ancient healers were brilliant empiricists, dangerously experimental, or simply very persuasive. Powdered minerals, roots, fungus, animal byproducts. History's medicine cabinet was a wild place. And then there are preservation marks. You learn to annotate damage discreetly. Water stains, wormholes, missing threads, burned traces. Every flaw tells a story. A singed edge may suggest candle accident. A water ripple might recall flood, humidity, or panicked rescue. Books, you realize, are physical survivors. During one afternoon session, an older archivist quietly shares a cautionary tale about a copyist generations ago who altered wording slightly, whether by error or intent, and triggered administrative confusion. The exact story may be exaggerated. Historians often wrestle with archival anecdotes polished by repetition. Still, the lesson is clear. Do not freelance with empire. As sunset gold reaches the desks, your copied pages are stacked for inspection. You feel both pride and dread, a combination apparently central to bureaucratic maturity. Your supervisor pauses over your work. You prepare internally for devastation. But then, a nod. Small, brief, barely visible. Yet in this environment, it feels like being knighted by a dragon. You have not mastered the craft. Not remotely. But you are no longer just carrying knowledge. You are reproducing it. And somewhere in that repetitive labor, under flickering light and aching muscles, you begin to understand why forgotten people matter so much to history. Because emperors may commission greatness, scholars may author brilliance, but without copyists, patient, anonymous, slightly miserable copyists, entire civilizations can vanish one missed character at a time. Section 6. As your brush hand toughens and your posture slowly transforms into something between disciplined scholar and politely folded crane, the library begins revealing a less comforting truth. Not every book on these shelves is here simply because it deserves to be. Some are here because power permits them. Some are absent because power does not. And today, with winter sunlight stretching thin across red columns and painted rafters, you are about to discover that preserving knowledge in the Ming court also means deciding what knowledge should quietly disappear. It begins with a summons. Never an encouraging word in imperial bureaucracy. A middle-ranking archival official dressed in layered robes that somehow communicate both scholarship and intimidation, requests assistance in the review chamber. This sounds harmless, perhaps even educational. It is not harmless. It is educational in the same way accidentally reading policy fine print can be educational. You are led to a smaller hall adjacent to restricted collections where several desks are covered not with treasured classics but with stacks awaiting evaluation. Some are damaged copies, some are duplicate texts, others are complicated. Here, books are not merely stored, they are judged. The chamber smells sharper than the main archives: fresh ink, sealing wax, paper fibers, and faint tension. Senior scholars, censors, and administrative clerks sit in careful arrangement, reviewing passages with extraordinary concentration. You quickly realize this process concerns ideological and political suitability as much as literary merit. Welcome, sleepy librarian, to the quieter machinery of censorship. Imperial China, including various Ming periods, exercised differing degrees of literary regulation. The state often promoted orthodox Confucianism while scrutinizing texts seen as politically destabilizing, morally suspect, or heterodox. The exact intensity varied by ruler and context, but the principle remained clear. Books could shape thought, and thought could shape loyalty. A dangerous combination. Your role is minor but revealing. Retrieve requested reference works, compare editions, and note discrepancies between approved and questioned versions. Which means you are essentially helping ancient bureaucrats fact-check ideas before deciding whether they deserve shelf space. At one table, officials compare historical commentaries discussing previous dynasties. Interpretations matter. A subtly critical historical analogy could imply criticism of current governance. If a text praises rebellion too warmly or highlights tyrannical rulers in suspiciously relevant ways, eyebrows rise. And in this room, raised eyebrows may as well be thunder. You witness a scholar delicately object to a passage, not because it is false, but because it could be misread. This may sound painfully familiar to anyone who has ever watched public messaging get aggressively polished. Historians still debate the full practical reach of censorship across all Ming scholarly circles, especially because intellectual life was broad and regional variation mattered. But state influence over official literary culture was undeniably powerful. Then you encounter something stranger: textual omission by subtlety. Not every undesirable book is dramatically burned. Sometimes a problematic edition is simply not recopied, not promoted, not circulated, not preserved with equal enthusiasm. It is bureaucratic invisibility, the administrative equivalent of burying something under paperwork until history forgets where it was. This may be one of the most chilling discoveries of your career so far, because destruction can be obvious, neglect can be quieter, and often just as final. You are shown examples of variant editions, a philosophical text with altered commentary, a historical narrative with softened criticism, marginal notes removed, interpretive framing adjusted. Nothing flashy, just enough. You begin to understand that archives are not passive vaults. They are active architectures of memory. During a midday pause, one weary clerk jokes that if Confucius returned, he'd spend half his time correcting citation politics. Another mutters that preserving approved wisdom sometimes requires suspiciously selective enthusiasm. You absolutely do not react to that one. Nearby, a censor reviews local gazetteers, regional records containing geography, customs, taxation, and notable events. These can be politically sensitive too. Local pride occasionally produces inconvenient narratives. Regional rebellions, corruption, or administrative embarrassments do not always sparkle under imperial review. And then comes the odd fact of the day. Certain taboo naming conventions required avoiding characters from emperors' personal names. This practice, known as naming taboo, could affect writing and publishing. Characters might be altered or omitted out of respect. Imagine rewriting portions of language itself because the boss's name is too sacred. Human resources has truly never had this level of ambition. As afternoon deepens, you help move a small set of texts designated for restricted storage rather than destruction. This fascinates you. Some works are not erased, they are controlled, access limited, consultation monitored, forbidden but not forgotten. A subtle difference. Perhaps because even states understand that information can remain useful, even if dangerous. In one hushed exchange, a senior archivist mentions previous eras where book destruction had more catastrophic precedent, likely alluding to the Qin dynasty's infamous association with book burnings and scholarly suppression. Whether entirely as dramatic as later legend claims remains debated, but the warning hangs clear. Dynasties know history, remembers literary violence. So the Ming approach, at least here, often feels more surgical. Preserve authority, shape narrative, guide memory. You leave the chamber with a stack of approved texts and a heavier awareness than when you entered. The shelves you once saw as stable now feel curated in ways both noble and unsettling. Because yes, these halls preserve brilliance, but they also preserve decisions. What to copy, what to ignore, what to praise, what to soften. And perhaps most hauntingly, what future generations may never realize was missing. As evening lanterns flicker alive and long shadows stretch between cedar shelves, you run your fingers along stitched bindings with newfound caution. Every library guards knowledge. But imperial libraries? They also guard power, disguised in paper. Section 7 by now, your days in the imperial library have become so structured that even your exhaustion arrives on schedule. Dawn summons you, duty bends you, ink stains you, and bureaucracy slowly seasons your soul like a mildly overworked dumpling. Yet as demanding as daylight is, nothing quite prepares you for the peculiar transformation that overtakes the library after sunset. Because when the official bustle thins, when ministers vanish behind lacquered doors, when copyists shuffle home, rubbing their wrists like veterans of punctuation warfare, the archive does not truly sleep. It changes. And tonight, for the first time, you are assigned to remain. The announcement comes late in the afternoon, delivered with all the emotional flourish of a tax receipt. A shipment of provincial records has arrived, alongside restoration tasks requiring immediate cataloging before morning review. Additional hands are needed. Apparently, your hands, So while others bow out into the freezing Beijing evening, you stay behind beneath lengthening shadows and lantern light, discovering what the Ming Library becomes when daylight authority softens and another kind of vigilance takes over. At dusk, the architecture shifts in mood. Sunlit grandeur gives way to amber pools of lamp glow, red columns darken to burgundy, gold accents flicker softly. The carved rafters overhead seem deeper somehow, as though dragons painted there are stretching in the half-light. The smell changes too, less dust and movement, more warm oil, cedarwood, old paper, and faint smoke. You suddenly understand why fire terrified archivists. Every lamp is both salvation and threat. Night staff move carefully, trimming wicks, adjusting lantern covers, monitoring flame distance with the seriousness of bomb disposal experts. Open flame in a wooden complex filled with irreplaceable manuscripts is, to put it mildly, an aggressively stressful design flaw. Historical records from many archival traditions show fire prevention was a central concern, and for good reason. Across dynasties and civilizations, libraries have often lived one spark away from tragedy. Your assignment begins with provincial tax ledgers, dense records of grain quotas, land assessments, census details, and administrative reports. Glamorous? No. Crucial? Absolutely. Empires are built as much on grain accounting as military triumph, though admittedly grain accounting gets fewer statues. You help unpack, inspect, and classify incoming bundles. Each document must be checked for seal integrity, moisture damage, completeness, and regional identifiers. Some scrolls arrive stiff with winter cold. Others smell faintly of travel, dust, leather, smoke, river damp. One record from a flood-prone region contains annotations on crop loss and tax adjustments, reminding you that while the Forbidden City glows with order, the empire beyond remains vulnerable to weather, famine, and human error. Historians still debate the effectiveness and consistency of Ming administrative responsiveness across provinces, but records like these reveal governance as constant negotiation, not effortless command. The night supervisor, thankfully less emotionally frostbitten than your daytime overseer, explains storage rotation protocols. Older materials may be relocated, recopied, or cross-referenced. Duplicate administrative records help preserve continuity in case of local corruption, loss, or disaster. In short, backups. Congratulations, ancient bureaucracy invented data redundancy. As hours pass, silence deepens, yet this silence is never empty. Brushes still whisper, shelves creak softly, cloth shoes murmur across stone, wind threads through distant eaves with low, hollow breath. Somewhere outside, a watch bell marks time, each strike reminding you that even emperors cannot pause midnight. And then there are the stories. Night work inevitably breeds superstition. A restoration clerk casually mentions certain halls feel crowded after dark, not with people, but with memory. Another swears he once heard page turning in a locked chamber. Someone else claims an archivist from decades past died over his desk and still corrects bad cataloging. This is almost certainly nonsense, probably. Still, when you are alone beside towering cabinets under flickering lamplight, surrounded by enough written thought to outlive kingdoms, your imagination becomes distressingly athletic. To calm yourself, you focus on practical tasks, humidity logs, damage notation, rewrapping vulnerable texts. You inspect thread stitching by lantern glow so carefully your eyes ache. In one chamber, medicinal manuscripts are being dried and flattened after minor moisture exposure. Their pages release odd herbal scents, camphor, roots, resin. One recipe includes ingredients so exotic and alarming, you silently decide modern cold medicine may deserve more gratitude. Around midnight, tea arrives, blessedly. Thin, bitter, and probably oversteeped, but in this moment it tastes like survival itself. A senior scribe jokes that imperial tea after midnight contains equal parts leaf and regret. You are beginning to appreciate his poetry. Then comes your strangest task yet, verifying astronomical calendar documents. Ming governance relied heavily on calendrical precision for ritual, agriculture, and legitimacy. Astronomy and calendar making were deeply political, tied to imperial authority and harmony between heaven and state. Incorrect celestial calculations were not merely academic blunders, they could imply cosmic disorder. No pressure. As you compare copied star charts and date registers, you marvel at how profoundly pre-modern governance linked bureaucracy to the cosmos. Tax records, crop cycles, eclipses, rituals, everything connected. Around you, the library no longer feels like storage. It feels like a nervous system, a paper empire processing reality, and you, sleepy, ink-smudged, slightly paranoid, are one tiny signal moving through it. By the final watch, fatigue softens everything. Lantern halos blur, brushstrokes slow, even strict supervisors yawn like mortal beings. Outside, frost gathers again beneath the stars. When your shift finally ends, you step from the archive into pre-dawn cold, the sky just beginning to pale. You should feel only tired, but instead, you feel changed. Because the night has shown you something daylight hides. Libraries are not static monuments, they are living machines, breathing through clerks, thinking through catalogs, dreaming through shelves. And long after the palace sleeps, someone must remain awake inside memory's fragile walls, guarding it from fire, decay, error, and sometimes from the dark itself. Section 8. After surviving your first night shift without being consumed by fire, ghosts, or agricultural tax ledgers, which, frankly, all felt equally possible at certain points, you return to daylight with the unsettling confidence of someone who has now seen the Imperial Library in both of its forms, the public face of polished order, and the midnight engine room where memory is quietly repaired. This should theoretically make today less surprising. It does not, because this morning, the library receives visitors, not ordinary scholars, not sleepy provincial clerks clutching records, foreigners. Now, foreign in Ming China is a complicated word, especially within the worldview of an empire that often understood itself as the cultural center of civilization. The tributary system, diplomatic missions, merchants, envoys, monks, and occasional travelers all passed through different channels of imperial contact. Some came to trade, some to negotiate, some to learn, some perhaps simply hoped not to accidentally offend anyone important. And today, through layers of ceremony and scrutiny, a small delegation of outside scholars and interpreters has been granted limited scholarly access, which means naturally your supervisors are panicking in the calmest possible way. Floors are rechecked, shelves straightened, catalog tables polished. Loose papers vanish faster than embarrassing messages before a phone handover. You are assigned to support document retrieval in a supervised consultation chamber, a role both thrilling and deeply stressful because one accidental mistake could become an international incident. Imagine dropping a priceless manuscript in front of diplomatic guests. You would probably achieve historical obscurity at record speed. The visitors arrive in layered garments distinctly different from court robes, fabrics, cuts, and accessories signaling other worlds. Among them are interpreters familiar with classical Chinese, and at least one scholar whose fascination with textual organization is so obvious you recognize it instantly. Every civilization, it seems, has at least one person who enters a library and mentally forgets food exists. The Ming Dynasty, especially under different reigns, engaged with diverse outside contacts, including Central Asian networks, Korean envoys, Southeast Asian emissaries, and eventually Europeans such as Jesuits in later periods. The exact makeup of your imagined day's visitors may blend historical textures, but the broader truth remains. Ideas traveled even when borders and rituals tried to choreograph them, and ideas, unlike tribute gifts, can be difficult to unpack neatly. Your chamber today focuses on astronomy, calendrics, geography, and selected classics, carefully curated, of course. No one is casually handing strangers politically sensitive, restricted texts over tea. Still, what unfolds is extraordinary. You witness discussion, not argument, not propaganda, but genuine scholarly exchange. A visiting scholar examines astronomical tables with fascination. Ming China possessed sophisticated traditions in astronomy, mathematics, and calendrical science, though like many societies, these fields evolved through both indigenous innovation and intercultural exchange. Questions arise about eclipse prediction, celestial mapping, and calendar calculation. You stand nearby, holding reference materials, trying very hard to look competent while your mind quietly explodes. Because this is the moment you realize the library does not merely preserve the empire's past. It also filters the world. Geographic texts emerge, maps, regional accounts, river systems, trade routes, border notes. Some are practical, some symbolic, some imperfect. Pre-modern cartography often blended political worldview with physical geography in ways that remind you maps have always been about power as much as direction. One visitor presents an unusual manuscript sample from abroad, Paper texture different, script unfamiliar, binding distinct. The room subtly shifts. Curiosity hums beneath etiquette. And here, perhaps, is one of the loveliest forgotten truths of scholarship. Even highly controlled systems often contain people who are genuinely curious. A senior Ming scholar, stern enough to frighten punctuation, carefully examines foreign binding methods with unmistakable interest. You nearly smile. Knowledge, for all its political baggage, still seduces. Naturally, there are also moments of mild absurdity. Translation delays create occasional confusion. One phrase about heavenly cycles takes so long to render that by the end, everyone looks as though philosophy itself may require snacks. A junior official nearly presents the wrong reference text, recovers just in time, and probably extends his lifespan by several years. Tea is served. Formally, cautiously. Nobody spills. Miracles continue. Historians still debate the full depth of certain intercultural scholarly impacts during specific Ming phases, especially given changing policies, maritime restrictions, and court politics. But from your place beside lacquered tables, one thing feels undeniable. Civilizations are never as isolated as they imagine. Books cross borders, methods migrate, questions survive translation. Even guarded empires cannot entirely prevent curiosity from peeking through the stacks. Later, after the visitors depart under escort and protocol, your supervisors exhale with near spiritual relief. You assist in reshelving consulted volumes, noting handling conditions, and replacing protective wrappings. But your mind lingers. You think of scripts you could not read, maps shaped by other horizons, calendars tuned to different skies. The library suddenly feels both immense and incomplete, not flawed, but finite. No archive, however grand, contains all knowledge. This realization is strangely comforting, because it means learning never ends. Even here, beneath dragon beams and imperial seals, there are still unknowns. As dusk approaches, one older archivist quietly remarks that preserving wisdom is honorable, but recognizing wisdom elsewhere is harder. Then he snorts softly and adds that some officials would rather debate proper bowing angles than useful mathematics. A fair criticism, honestly. You return to your duties changed once more, not by spectacle, but by perspective. The shelves around you still hold dynastic memory, but now, when you run your fingers along stitched bindings, you imagine distant libraries too. Other keepers, other languages, other forgotten workers bent over pages beneath entirely different moons. And for a brief moment in the hush between catalog drawers and fading light, the Imperial Library feels less like the center of the world, and more like one magnificent room inside it. Section 9. By now, you have become something remarkable by Imperial Librarian standards. Not important, certainly not powerful, but useful enough that people occasionally trust you with tasks requiring both hands and approximately 3 functioning brain cells. In the Ming bureaucracy, this is practically a glowing endorsement. Your brush control has improved. Your bow no longer resembles a folding chair, collapsing under emotional pressure. You can identify major catalog categories without visibly panicking. And perhaps most impressively, you've learned how to carry tea near manuscripts with the trembling precision of a bomb technician. So when spring edges softly toward Beijing, loosening winter's grip and stirring the palace courtyards with the faint scent of thawing earth, you find yourself drawn into one of the empire's most relentless engines of ambition, the examination season. If the library is memory, then the imperial examination system is aspiration weaponized. Every year across Ming China, waves of hopeful scholars devoted themselves to the civil service examinations, an intricate hierarchy of local, provincial, and metropolitan tests rooted largely in Confucian classics. Success could elevate a family's status for generations. Failure could mean heartbreak, poverty, or the deeply specific misery of memorizing philosophy only to be defeated by essay formatting. This was not casual scholarship. This was societal pressure cooked slowly over ink. Your role begins innocently enough, assisting with the retrieval and maintenance of approved reference texts used by instructors, examiners, and scholarly consultants, preparing materials connected to educational orthodoxy. You are not writing exam questions, thankfully. That level of responsibility might liquefy your organs. Still, proximity alone is illuminating. Suddenly, the library fills with a different energy, not quieter, sharper. Young scholars arrive with eyes ringed by fatigue, sleeves tidy, minds overloaded, tutors cross-reference canonical passages. Senior academics debate interpretation nuances with all the intensity of people arguing over whether one sentence from Mencius can determine 40 years of socioeconomic destiny. Which, to be fair, it kind of can. The core of the Ming examination system emphasized mastery of Confucian texts, especially through structured forms like the notorious eight-legged essay during many periods. This rigid format demanded precise organization and rhetorical discipline. Historians still debate how much this system promoted meritocracy versus intellectual conformity, but there is little doubt it shaped elite culture profoundly. You begin assisting in the preparation of study compilations, authorized summaries, commentary references, approved editions. Every text must align with accepted orthodoxy. A misplaced interpretive emphasis could at minimum confuse students and at worst produce political awkwardness. And nothing terrifies bureaucracies like creative awkwardness. Outside official halls, examination candidates crowd lodging spaces, courtyards, and study corners. Some mutter passages under their breath while pacing. Others sit motionless, conserving mental energy like philosophical batteries. A few look so exhausted you suspect they have transcended normal sleep cycles entirely. One candidate, barely older than you, recites classical lines while absent-mindedly chewing cold rice cake. He has studied for years. His family sold land to support his education. His entire future may hinge on performance over a few grueling sessions. No pressure there. The exams themselves could be brutal. Candidates were often confined in small cells for days, writing essays under strict supervision. Food, bedding, and basic supplies were minimal. Illness, stress, and cheating scandals all existed. Some candidates allegedly brought hidden notes in clothing or personal items, proving once again that standardized testing inspires both scholarship and deeply creative dishonesty. Naturally, anti-cheating measures were severe. Calligraphy was scrutinized. Identity precautions mattered. Texts were tightly controlled. Compared to this, having your phone confiscated before a modern exam suddenly feels charmingly mild. Your library's contribution to this system is enormous. It preserves educational orthodoxy, supports examiner consistency, and reproduces scholarly standards. In many ways, the shelves around you are manufacturing officials long before any appointment, and there are stranger details too. You discover collections of model essays, essentially ancient test prep guides, because of course civilization invented those immediately. Some are revered, some mocked privately for sounding elegant but hollow. A grizzled copyist mutters that many successful essays contain excellent structure and the soul of steamed cabbage. You treasure him instantly. Meanwhile, scholars debate obscure textual interpretations with ferocious sincerity. A phrase's moral nuance can provoke hours of discussion. One punctuation choice might alter philosophical emphasis. Watching them, you realize human beings have always possessed an astonishing capacity to convert literature into stress. And yet beneath the pressure, there is something undeniably moving. For all its flaws, this system offers many men, though certainly not equally to all social classes, a path not purely determined by birth. Talent, memory, discipline, and endurance matter, at least in theory. Reality, of course, is messier. Wealthier families often secured better preparation. Social structures remained unequal. Historians continue debating the system's practical fairness. Still, compared to many hereditary aristocracies elsewhere, the examination structure represented a remarkable institutional investment in literary governance. One rainy afternoon, you assist an elderly scholar reviewing worn classics for his final mentoring cohort. His beard is silver, his robes patched but clean, his voice gentle. He says little, but as he handles a text, his fingertips linger with extraordinary tenderness. These pages, he murmurs almost to himself, have carried more families than boats. You feel that. Because suddenly the library's shelves are not just preserving philosophy, they are preserving hope. Hope for office, hope for dignity, hope that a farmer's son might one day advise emperors instead of counting another man's grain. As examination caravans swell and anxiety saturates the air like invisible thunder, you continue your humble tasks, retrieving, copying, preserving, organizing. Quiet work, uncelebrated work, but essential. Because before scholars can compete, before essays can be judged, before futures can rise or collapse, someone must keep the books ready. And so, while thousands chase glory through brushstrokes, you remain among the shelves, anonymous, watchful, ink-stained, helping sustain the vast paper ladder by which an empire promises, however imperfectly, that learning might change a life. Section 10. Just when you begin believing the greatest threat to knowledge is poor handwriting, political editing, or scholars collapsing dramatically into their examination essays, the library reminds you of an older, simpler terror. Fire. Not metaphorical fire. Not intellectual fire. Actual, hungry, wood-loving flame. It begins on a dry afternoon when spring winds sharpen unexpectedly, sliding through courtyards with the restless energy of a gossip who has just learned something devastating. The palace complex, magnificent though it is, remains profoundly vulnerable. Vast wooden halls, lacquered beams, paper screens, oil lamps, storage cabinets, and enough dry material to make every archivist's pulse quietly unstable. You are in a secondary records hall, organizing regional census bundles with all the emotional excitement such work naturally inspires when the first smell reaches you. Smoke. At first, faint. So faint you wonder whether it's simply kitchen drift or ceremonial incense from some distant hall. Then someone shouts, not the refined, carefully modulated shout of court etiquette, a real one. Suddenly, the room changes shape, not physically, not yet, but psychologically. Order fractures, heads turn, brushes stop, footsteps accelerate. Your supervisor, who until now seemed biologically incapable of urgency, moves with startling speed. Seal the cabinets! You do not wait for elaboration. Fire in an imperial archive is not merely a building problem. It is a civilizational emergency. Throughout history, libraries have been catastrophically vulnerable to fire, whether through accident, war, or neglect. From ancient Alexandria to countless lesser-known archives, humanity has repeatedly demonstrated a tragic ability to store priceless knowledge in highly flammable containers. The Ming are not unaware of this irony. Protocols activate instantly, doors close strategically to limit airflow, water lines form, protective wrappings are deployed. Priority materials, rare manuscripts, dynastic records, irreplaceable collections are identified for immediate relocation. You, humble paper mule that you are, become part of a manuscript evacuation operation. And here is where history gets intensely physical. Bundles are heavy, cabinets jam, smoke thickens, not everywhere thankfully. The fire appears to have begun in an adjacent service structure, possibly storage or lamp related, though in the confusion, certainty vanishes. Historians often debate exact causes in many historical fires for good reason. Chaos is not an excellent archivist. Still, danger is real. The smell grows sharper. Burning wood, hot oil, scorched lacquer. Bells sound. Courtyard commands echo. Guards, servants, eunuchs, clerks. Hierarchy remains, but survival compresses it. You are assigned to transport selected stitch volumes from a vulnerable wing into an interior stone-secured annex. Run. Bowing etiquette has, for the moment, understandably relaxed. Your arms strain under the weight. Cloth wrappings scratch your wrists. Heat prickles at your neck, though flames remain mostly elsewhere. Around you, others move in coordinated panic, a phrase you had not previously realized could exist. One senior archivist refuses to leave without verifying a catalog chest. Madness? Possibly. Heroism? Also possibly. Because here lies one of the strangest truths about librarians, ancient or modern. Some genuinely will risk themselves for paper, and occasionally they are absolutely correct to do so. As you move between halls, you glimpse smoke curling above rooflines, gray against bright sky. Buckets pass hand to hand, orders ring out. Some workers wet cloths and drape them near storage thresholds. Others remove nearby combustibles. Every second feels brittle, and then, amid fear, absurdity still survives. A panicked junior clerk nearly rescues the wrong crate, routine grain tariffs instead of rare manuscripts, before being redirected so aggressively you suspect his ancestors also flinched. You would laugh if your lungs weren't busy. One little known but practical historical reality. Many palace and archive systems used architectural spacing, courtyards, and compartmentalization partly to reduce catastrophic spread. Fire prevention was never perfect, but design mattered. Here, those decisions may now be saving more than buildings. Hours seem to collapse strangely during crisis. Time becomes buckets, footsteps, coughing, inventory, heat. Eventually, mercifully, the worst appears contained. The fire damages outbuildings and some materials, but the central archive holdings, at least your section, survive. Survive, what a fragile, beautiful word. Afterward comes the reckoning. Ash drifts, wood smolders, faces blackened with soot emerge from courtyards like exhausted ghosts. Officials assess losses with expressions usually reserved for dynastic prophecy. And then begins the slower labor. Damage inspection, smoke exposure review, moisture checks, catalog reconciliation. Because saving books from flame is only the beginning. Water can warp, smoke can stain, heat can weaken binding, disaster lingers administratively. You help lay out affected materials in ventilated zones, checking edges, thread, paper integrity. Some are safe, some singed, some lost. Not many, perhaps, but enough to wound. A partially damaged local record from a remote province flakes at one corner. A commentary text blackens along an edge. Nothing world-ending. Yet each scar feels personal now. Historians still debate the long-term consequences of countless small archival losses across dynasties, those little disappearances less famous than major destruction but cumulative. Not every vanished idea burns in legendary catastrophe. Sometimes it curls away quietly in one damaged folio. That realization stays with you. By nightfall, the surviving halls smell of wet ash and ink. Exhaustion hangs over everyone, even the arrogant. Tea tastes like smoke. Silence feels earned. Your supervisor, soot on his sleeve and dignity only partially restored, surveys the shelves and says, almost softly, memory nearly burns faster than wood. For once, nobody jokes, because today you have carried more than books. You have carried continuity. And as you sit beneath dim lantern light, muscles trembling, robes filthy, surrounded by survivors bound in thread and paper, you understand more deeply than ever. Libraries are not immortal. They endure only because, every so often, ordinary tired people choose to run toward the flames instead of away. Section 11. After the fire, the library smells different, not ruined, not broken, but changed. For days, perhaps weeks, every corridor carries faint reminders. Smoke woven into cedar shelves, dampness lingering in recently aired chambers, charred wood replaced with fresh timber that somehow looks too young beside centuries of authority. Even after repairs begin, the archive feels like a person who survived illness, outwardly functioning, inwardly aware of fragility. And perhaps that is why you notice it. Or perhaps it was always there, tucked beneath ordinary duty, like a secret slip between pages. The hidden books. Not mythical cursed scrolls humming under moonlight, sadly. Reality, as usual, is subtler and therefore more interesting. Your discovery begins through restoration reassignment. Because several collections were shifted after the fire, lower-level staff, meaning you, lucky survivor of soot and shelving, are temporarily assisting with relocation audits in lesser-used storage annexes. These are not the grand halls of imperial prestige. These are the administrative side arteries, overflow chambers, restricted corners, places where memory gets organized, delayed, or quietly complicated. The annex itself sits behind two interior courtyards and one lock whose key custodian looks as though joy was outlawed in his childhood. Inside, conditions are cooler, dimmer, and more practical than ceremonial. Shelves are denser, labeling systems more cryptic. Dust, despite best efforts, a little more ambitious. At first, your work is routine. Inspect transferred bundles, verify seal marks, cross-reference catalog slips. Then you find discrepancies, not dramatic ones, small things, a title listed one way, shelved another, a commentary noted in inventory but physically wrapped under a broader category, a philosophical treatise filed among regional miscellany. Administrative accidents happen, of course. Bureaucracies are made of humans, and humans occasionally misplace reality. But then patterns emerge. Certain texts, heterodox interpretations, politically awkward histories, fringe cosmologies, unorthodox religious commentaries, appear neither destroyed nor prominently cataloged, simply displaced, restricted, perhaps, buffered, managed. And suddenly, you realize you are standing not in a graveyard of forbidden knowledge, but in a waiting room. Throughout Chinese history, state control over ideas varied by era and issue, but suppression did not always mean total annihilation. Sometimes texts were hidden, reclassified, or made inconveniently inaccessible rather than obliterated. Historians still debate specific practices in many cases, but archives often reveal nuance beyond dramatic narratives. You carefully unwrap one supervised volume under instruction from a senior archivist whose tone suggests this is educational, but absolutely not conversational. The text concerns alternative interpretations of governance and moral authority, not outright rebellion, but enough independent thinking to raise bureaucratic eyebrows. Another manuscript preserves local accounts contradicting polished official histories. Yet another includes esoteric Taoist practices and occult references so strange they make your medicinal crocodile memory feel almost mainstream. And then there are personal compilations, private scholarly notebooks, marginalia, commentaries with side notes, tiny handwritten rebellions in brushstroke form. These fascinate you most, because official texts proclaim, private notes confess. One scholar, centuries earlier, has scribbled beside an orthodox passage something equivalent to, "This sounds elegant, but reality disagrees." You nearly choke on your own silence. Humanity, it seems, has always been reviewing authority with suspicious side comments. Naturally, access here is controlled. You are not permitted leisurely reading. But glimpses are enough. There are banned sect references, questioned political analyses, alternative historical interpretations, medical theories outside mainstream endorsement. Some may be inaccurate, some brilliant, some dangerous, some merely inconvenient. That is the unsettling beauty of hidden shelves. They preserve possibility. A senior archivist, older than most and significantly less theatrical than your imagination hoped, quietly explains that total destruction can sometimes create more risk than restricted preservation. Better to know what exists, better to monitor than erase blindly. You are struck by the practicality. Empires, for all their grandeur, often behave like anxious parents checking what ideas their children might discover. During inventory, you uncover one especially odd compilation, a collection of folk beliefs, omens, and rural supernatural practices from multiple provinces, weather divinations, burial customs, talismans, local gods. Scholars may dismiss much of it, but preserving such material offers glimpses into ordinary life beyond court polish. This, perhaps, moves you most deeply, because the Grand Library preserves emperors, but these hidden texts preserve everyone else: the worried farmer, the village healer, the skeptic, the mystic, the provincial teacher muttering, "Well, officially." And there, in forgotten annexes, history becomes richer, not cleaner, not simpler, but truer. Of course, secrecy remains real. You are repeatedly reminded that mishandling or unauthorized discussion could invite severe consequences. Restricted does not mean casual. Still, the knowledge changes you. Before, you believed libraries were shelves of certainty. Now you understand they are ecosystems of argument. Some ideas in sunlight, some in shadow, some waiting. As evening falls and you reseal controversial bundles beneath watchful supervision, you feel an odd tenderness toward these hidden works. Not because all are correct, but because their survival means complexity survived too. History is not one voice. It is a chorus, edited unevenly. And somewhere behind lacquered cabinets and official orthodoxy, forgotten librarians like you quietly ensured that even the inconvenient notes were sometimes spared the flames, which may be one of civilization's most underrated miracles. Section 12, Winter returns more sharply than you remember, as though the northern wind spent autumn gathering grievances and has now arrived personally to file them against your bones. The forbidden city hardens under frost. Roof tiles glaze silver at dawn. Stone courtyards sting through cloth shoes. Water basins skin over with ice so thin and deceptive they resemble polished glass designed by mildly vindictive spirits. Your breath appears in pale bursts each morning, vanishing almost immediately. Tiny reminders that warmth, like dynasties, is often temporary. And yet the library continues. Of course it does. Empires may tremble, fires may threaten, politics may rearrange shelves, but records still require drying, catalogs still require updating, and somewhere a senior official will absolutely still complain about dust. Civilization, it turns out, has extraordinary commitment to paperwork regardless of temperature. For you, winter means adaptation. Ink behaves differently in cold. This becomes your first misery. The once fluid black sheen now thickens sluggishly, resisting the brush like stubborn syrup. Water chills fingers numb during grinding. Brushes stiffen. Paper grows brittle if conditions shift too harshly. Preservation in winter is not merely about comfort, it is environmental warfare. You learn to warm inkstones subtly, protect materials from condensation, and monitor storage spaces for dangerous fluctuations. Too dry and paper cracks. Too damp and mold lurks. Ancient librarianship increasingly resembles a cross between scholarship and weather management. Historians still debate specific regional preservation techniques in some archive systems, but practical climate awareness was undeniably crucial in manuscript cultures. Before digital backups, humidity could become a historical villain. You spend longer hours in enclosed storage chambers where braziers are used cautiously, always cautiously. Heat is precious, fire is terrifying. This duality governs every winter decision. A brazier too near shelves, catastrophe. Too far, frozen fingers and damaged work. Balance once again becomes policy. You develop absurd expertise in the exact distance at which your hands may thaw without accidentally endangering philosophy. Outside, the larger empire strains too. Winter historically affected grain transport, regional logistics, and vulnerable populations. Reports entering the archive mention delayed shipments, poor harvests in certain provinces, and administrative appeals. Governance does not hibernate. One bitter morning, you assist in processing emergency relief records tied to crop failure in colder northern territories. The ledgers are clinical, numbers, quotas, allocations. But behind every figure lies hunger. You are reminded that bureaucracy can sound dry while documenting human desperation. This sobers you more than the weather. Nearby, an older records clerk quietly remarks that snow looks pure from palace roofs, less so from empty farms. You never forget that. Within the library, winter also changes people. Staff gather closer to braziers during breaks, hierarchy softening just slightly beneath shared suffering. Even severe supervisors become marginally more human when their noses are red. Tea consumption rises to near spiritual levels. A copyist jokes that if tea were taxed by necessity, scholars would overthrow heaven. Your own fingers chap and darken with ink, skin roughened by cold and washing. You begin wrapping cloth strips beneath sleeves. Everyone does. Vanity loses spectacularly against frostbite. And then there are the books themselves. Winter inspections reveal weaknesses hidden in warmer months, binding stress, thread shrinkage, warped covers. You participate in repair rotations, reinforcing stitching, adjusting wrappers, checking lacquered cases. It is slow, repetitive work, but strangely intimate. You are, in effect, helping books survive the season. One afternoon, while repairing a damaged agricultural manual, you notice detailed notes on seasonal crop adaptation, generations of practical survival embedded in text. The irony is beautiful, a freezing librarian preserving wisdom on surviving difficult winters. There are also stranger comforts, the smell of warmed paper, lantern glow against snow-lit windows, the muffled hush that snowfall brings to outer courtyards, softening even imperial grandeur into something gentler. For brief moments, the library feels almost monastic. Then someone drops a catalog drawer, and tranquility dies immediately. Still, winter nights possess rare beauty. You sometimes work late while snow gathers on tiled roofs beyond lattice screens. Moonlight reflects upward, brightening courtyards with ghostly silver. The world outside becomes hushed enough that page-turning sounds monumental. In these moments, you feel the full oddness of your life. While armies patrol borders, farmers brace fields, merchants curse roads, and ministers scheme under silk blankets, you are here, protecting paper from weather. And somehow this matters profoundly, because winter is an enemy of memory too. Cold can crack, damp can rot, neglect can erase. But care, small, repetitive, often anonymous care, preserves continuity. As the season deepens, illness spreads among some staff. Coughs echo, herbal remedies circulate, ginger, roots, decoctions of suspicious aroma. Ming medicine, rich and complex though it was, could be impressive, inconsistent, or deeply alarming depending on context. One concoction handed to you smells like boiled tree bark having a personal crisis. You drink it anyway. Survival over flavor. By season's midpoint, you are leaner, tougher, and perhaps slightly more philosophical, mostly because extreme cold encourages reflection when your hands are too numb for speed. And what you begin to understand is this: civilization is not preserved only by grand acts. Not just encyclopedias, not just emperors. Sometimes it survives because, in the dead of winter, a tired librarian keeps the ink warm, checks the bindings, dries the pages, and shows up again before sunrise. Quietly, repeatedly. So while snow settles over the forbidden city and history outside continues its endless storms, you remain among shelves and smoke-thin breath, guarding fragile words against the oldest lesson winter teaches. Everything breaks, eventually. unless someone keeps tending the fire carefully enough. Section 13. By the time the ice begins loosening from courtyard stones and the first stubborn hints of spring creep back through the capital, you have become something you never expected. Not merely a worker in the Imperial Library, a witness. Not the kind painted in portraits or immortalized in official annals, of course. No one is commissioning heroic scrolls of that one reasonably competent shelf clerk. But your years among ledgers, censored commentaries, hidden annexes, examination manuals, and near-catastrophic fire have taught you something rare. You are standing close enough to history's machinery to hear it grind. And lately, it is grinding harder. The signs arrive first in documents. They always do. Administrative tones shift. Memorials from provincial officials grow sharper. Grain transport disputes increase. Military supply records demand more urgent cross-referencing. Border concerns, tax pressures, factional tensions. Nothing explodes all at once, but paper begins trembling before empires do. This is one of bureaucracy's strange gifts. Instability often whispers in filing systems before it screams in streets. You notice changes in the scholars too. Certain discussions become more careful. Certain jokes disappear. Certain names are spoken less freely. Court politics in the Ming Dynasty could be fierce, shaped by factional rivalry, imperial priorities, eunuch influence, fiscal strain, and regional pressures. Historians still debate the weight of specific causes in different crises, because history rarely offers the courtesy of single explanations. But from your shelf-line vantage point, one truth is obvious. The library is changing, not physically at first, philosophically. Text requests shift toward precedent, governance, crisis management, military histories, and earlier dynastic warnings. Officials suddenly care very deeply about what previous rulers did during difficult transitions, which is rarely a sign of national relaxation. Ancient history, you discover, often becomes urgently fashionable when current politics grow uncomfortable. You spend more time retrieving records of former rebellions, tax reforms, and administrative recoveries. Grain shortages in one century become cautionary reading in another. Court failures from long-dead emperors are revisited with suspicious intensity. One senior official requests multiple histories concerning dynastic decline. Nobody says why. Nobody needs to. You also witness subtle revisions accelerating. New commentaries gain favor. Certain interpretations become emphasized. Political legitimacy, as ever, is partly textual. Because when power wobbles, narrative braces it. In one especially tense week, several local records arrive with contradictory accounts of unrest, banditry, protest, tax resistance, perhaps exaggeration, perhaps suppression. The language is cautious, sanitized in some places, alarmingly direct in others. You help compare copies. Differences matter. You realize, perhaps more painfully than before, that history is being written while you are filing it. And then there is personnel change. A scholar disappears from regular duty, not dramatically. No arrest in front of you. No cinematic scandal. Simply reassigned, removed, or politically eclipsed. Another rises. Another falls quiet. The court, like the shelves, is constantly reordered. One archivist mutters that in uncertain times, books are easier to relocate than opinions. You suspect he is not joking. Beyond politics, practical anxieties grow too. Budget shifts affect copying priorities. Certain restoration projects stall. Provincial correspondence suggests logistical strain. Even the library, guardian of memory, cannot entirely separate itself from material conditions. Empires need paper. Paper needs labor. Labor needs stability. Stability, inconveniently, is not guaranteed. Yet amid this, ordinary routines persist with almost absurd dignity. Ink still must be ground. Dust still gathers. Catalog drawers still jam at the worst possible moments. One might think civilization would pause during turbulence. But no, someone still insists agricultural indexes remain alphabetized. This continuity becomes strangely moving. Because perhaps that is how institutions survive. Not through denial, but through maintenance. You begin noticing younger clerks watching older ones more closely now, as if learning not just procedure, but resilience. How to preserve order when larger structures feel uncertain. How to keep records clear when rumors cloud everything else. And then one day, while handling a chronicle from a previous era of transition, you pause over a line describing how dynasties rarely collapse from one blow alone, but from cumulative fractures, administrative, economic, military, moral. You are not supposed to personalize texts, but you do, because suddenly every repaired binding feels symbolic, every corrected ledger defiant, every preserved contradiction precious. The library no longer seems like a passive witness to power. It is part of the struggle against forgetting what instability looks like. There are rumors, naturally. There are always rumors about reforms, about factional victories, about imperial moods, about distant threats, some absurd, some plausible, some impossible to untangle. A tea vendor outside one gate allegedly predicts policy better than half the court. Honestly, based on what you've seen, entirely possible. Still, through all this, you keep working, not because politics vanish, but because memory matters more when politics intensify. You preserve older warnings, current records, fragile truths, because someday someone may need to know how this felt, not just what happened. And perhaps they will not read ministerial speeches first. Perhaps they will read supply lists, grain reports, revised commentaries, missing names, the quiet clues. So as spring rain taps gently against tiled roofs and red walls hold their ancient calm, you move once more between shelves with practiced care. Around you, the dynasty continues. Magnificent, anxious, adaptive. And you, forgotten librarian, remain at your post while history subtly rearranges itself, one document at a time. Section 14 Time, you eventually discover, does something peculiar inside a great library. It does not march, it accumulates. Layer by layer, shelf by shelf, year by year, until one morning you reach for a familiar catalog drawer and realize your own hands now look more like the senior archivist's hands once did. Lined, ink-shadowed, steady in ways youth never was. You did not notice yourself aging all at once. No dramatic revelation. No ceremonial announcement from heaven. Just winter after winter, rain note after rain note, repaired binding after repaired binding, until newer clerks begin bowing to you with the same cautious respect you once reserved for men whose eyebrows alone could ruin your day. You have become one of them. Not powerful exactly, but established, a fixture, a quiet hinge in memory's door. The younger staff call you sir now, which is deeply unsettling, considering you still remember nearly dropping a manuscript because your sleeve snagged on a cabinet latch 20 years ago. Yet here you are, still walking the same corridors, still breathing cedar, dust, ink, and winter smoke, still arriving before sunrise more often than your joints consider polite. Dynasties adore grandeur, but institutions are often truly sustained by people like you, those who simply keep showing up long after ambition cools. Your duties have shifted. You copy less now. Younger wrists handle that. Instead, you supervise cataloging, oversee preservation, mentor novices, and occasionally settle disputes so absurd they almost feel eternal. Did this commentary belong in moral philosophy or governance? Who moved the provincial flood registers? Why is there tea near astronomy? Human civilization, it seems, remains gloriously consistent. You teach practical things first. Never trust damp corners. Always verify seals. Check thread tension before shelving. If a supervisor says routine review in that tone, emotionally prepare. But over time, you also teach subtler lessons. Books are vulnerable. Records are political. Silence can preserve. Margins matter. And perhaps most importantly, what survives is not always what was most true, but often what was best protected. This thought follows you often now, because you have outlived colleagues. Some retired. Some vanished into political reshuffling. Some succumbed to illness. A few, remembered mostly by notation habits and muttered stories, seem to linger in shelves more vividly than they ever did in court. One former copyist, notorious for overusing annotation slips, is still referenced whenever paperwork grows excessive. Don't become another Long, they joke. You smile every time. This perhaps is immortality for ordinary people. Not monuments, habits. You also witness broader changes. New reigns bring new emphases. Priorities shift. Preferred interpretations evolve. Some restoration campaigns flourish, others languish. Imperial attention, like weather, moves unevenly. And still, beneath policy, the library endures. Not unchanged, but continuous. Historians still debate many details of late Ming intellectual and bureaucratic transformation, but from your long view, continuity and fragility seem less like opposites and more like partners. The shelves hold both. There are losses, of course, texts damaged beyond repair, copies gone missing, sections revised, ideas fading because no one recopied them. This pains you more than it once did. Not dramatically, quietly, like watching familiar lanterns extinguish one by one across distant courtyards. So you become more deliberate. You flag obscure works for preservation when possible. You encourage broad catalog precision. You quietly ensure useful oddities do not vanish simply because they are unfashionable. Nothing rebellious, nothing foolish, just attentive stewardship. A small resistance against unnecessary forgetting. You train one particularly sharp apprentice who reminds you painfully of yourself, earnest, nervous, too eager to impress. He once nearly shelved restricted philosophical commentary among agricultural irrigation manuals, which, while academically creative, was unacceptable. You correct him gently, mostly gently, and later, unexpectedly, you hear him teaching another junior clerk one of your own phrases. Empires fear fire, but librarians fear moisture. You nearly laugh tea through your nose. So this is how legacy works. Not in proclamations, in repeated wisdom. Outside the library, the world remains turbulent as ever. Taxes, politics, weather, ambition, uncertainty. But inside, your life narrows beautifully toward care. Not glamorous care, not famous care. The kind that checks corners, preserves contradictions, updates references, protects pages from insects, and notices when one missing folio might matter. You begin understanding something bittersweet. The people who guard civilization's memory are often edited out of civilization's memory. Emperors receive portraits, generals receive epics, philosophers receive quotations. But librarians, often, if remembered at all, survive as ink fingerprints without names. And strangely, you are at peace with this, because anonymity has given you perspective. You did not need to be history's hero to help history survive. As age settles into your knees and softens your urgency, your evening walks through archive halls become almost meditative. Lantern light glows warm against lacquer. Dust drifts like slow gold in late sun. Young clerks murmur over fresh tasks. Somewhere, pages turn. Always pages turning, and each sound comforts you. Because long after your own footsteps fade, the shelves may still breathe. The catalogs may still guide. The hidden annexes may still whisper. And perhaps some future keeper, tired, underpaid, careful, will touch a volume you helped preserve without ever knowing your name. Which, for a forgotten Ming librarian, may be enough. Section fiend. And so, almost without announcement, you arrive at the final season of your life, not through catastrophe, nor scandal, nor some dramatic courtly crescendo, but through repetition so faithful it becomes destiny. The shelves are taller now. Not literally, perhaps, though age has a way of making ladders seem more ideological than structural. No, they feel taller because you understand their weight more fully. Every stitched spine, every repaired folio, every smoke-kissed ledger, every hidden commentary, every approved classic, every quietly inconvenient manuscript tucked just far enough from easy reach, they no longer appear as objects alone. They are accumulations of survival, and so are you. Your mornings begin more slowly these days. Younger clerks arrive first sometimes, though you still wake before dawn from decades of habit, your body loyal to bells even when duty occasionally grants mercy. Winter aches linger longer in your fingers. Inkstones feel heavier. Small script under poor light becomes an adversary worthy of diplomatic negotiation. Yet still you come, across familiar courtyards, past red walls weathered by rain after rain, through gates where guards have changed faces more times than you can count, into the library, always the library. There is comfort now in ritual once defined by fear. You know which floorboards murmur, which cabinet sticks in humid weather, which apprentices rush too quickly, which corners gather stealthy dust, which scholars overquote, which officials request history only when it flatters urgency. You know where the winter drafts slip, where smoke once stained beams, where hidden annexes breathe quietly behind bureaucracy, and in knowing, you become less a servant of the archive than part of its architecture. Not stone, not cedar, human memory. Outside, the Ming world continues its vast restless motion. Politics, reforms, anxieties, splendor, strain. Dynasties, like seasons, always imagine themselves permanent until history gently proves otherwise. Historians still debate countless details of decline, transformation, continuity, and collapse, because no civilization ever ends in one neat sentence. But you have learned something simpler than theory. Everything passes. Paper yellows, silk frays, walls crack, names fade. Even emperors become catalog entries eventually. What matters, perhaps more than grandeur, is what gets carried forward. In your later years, you are tasked less with labor and more with review. You examine restoration priorities, advise on catalog disputes, recommend what should be recopied before deterioration wins. It is solemn work, triage for memory. And here, at the edge of your own long service, your choices feel strangely intimate. A provincial agricultural text with water damage, preserve it. An obscure philosophical rebuttal, retain one copy. Flood reports from a forgotten district, keep them. A set of local medicinal practices, odd but detailed, archive carefully. Why? Because age has taught you what youth often misses. History is not only emperors, it is irrigation, medicine, tax mistakes, village fears, marginal notes, small truths. The empire's face may be gilded, but its body is ordinary life. And ordinary life deserves memory too. One spring evening, beneath soft lantern light and the distant flutter of banners beyond inner walls, you train your final apprentice. He is competent, thoughtful, and only occasionally disastrous, a promising ratio. He asks, perhaps innocently, whether you regret never rising higher. Higher. The question lingers. You look around, at shelves, at dust made golden in evening sun, at bindings you saved, at texts others nearly forgot, at the hush, and you realize with surprising gentleness that higher was never the same as deeper. You did not sit on the dragon throne, you did not command fleets, you did not shape law from silk-draped chambers, but you stood beside memory, protected it, sorted it, questioned it, sheltered complexity when possible, and in your own quiet way, you helped an empire remember itself. So no, you do not regret. When your final years narrow, as all lives do, your walks become shorter. You spend more hours seated near favorite desks, reviewing under warm light, listening more than moving. The younger generation fills corridors with familiar uncertainty. Their footsteps echo like your own once did. Sometimes when no one needs you immediately, you simply rest your hand on old wood and listen. Pages turning, brushes whispering, drawers sliding, wind beyond eaves. The breathing of a place that outlasts individuals by transforming them into continuity. And eventually, one ordinary day, because most endings are ordinary, you leave work early. No omen, no thunder, just fatigue, gentle and complete. You pause at a doorway and glance back, at the shelves, at the corridors, at the long red-gold dusk of your life's true home. And perhaps no one there fully understands what is passing in that quiet moment. But that is fitting. Forgotten librarians were never meant for spectacle, only for care. In the years after, maybe your name softens in records. Perhaps a notation survives, perhaps not. Maybe an apprentice repeats one of your warnings about damp corners. Maybe a preserved folio outlives dynasties because of one recommendation you made on a cold morning, no chronicle considered important. This too is enough, because somewhere, long after your hands are still, someone will open a cabinet, lift a manuscript, read a line, learn something, and they will not know how many unseen people carried that moment toward them. But you will have been one of them. Now the lamps dim lower. The shelves blur softly at the edges. Dust drifts like golden sleep through late light. The great library, with all its caution and grandeur, its censored halls and hidden annexes, its winter ink and summer dust, its fires survived and pages preserved, grows quieter. You have walked its corridors long enough. So now at last, you may rest. Let the young grind the ink. Let the bells mark dawn. Let the pages keep turning. And you, dear keeper, can finally set down the bundle. Breathe out. The doors close softly. The lantern hum fades. History continues as it always does, but farther away now, gentler like rain on distant roofs or brush on paper in another room. And as sleep settles over tiled roofs, cedar shelves, red walls, and the memory of your careful hands, the world itself seems to lower its voice. Until even the dust can dream. Open quote, open quote, open quote, end of script. Sweet dreams, close quote, close quote, close quote.